I used to love Preston Manning. He's the guy who got me involved in politics when I was a teenager. I worked for him as a volunteer, and then I actually went to Parliament working as his legislative assistant for 2 years. One of my favorite moments was when he fought against the Kyoto Protocol. He was really the only guy in Canada fighting against it for reasons of junk science, for reasons of stealth taxes, for reasons of jurisdiction. It was a great moment and one of the things I loved about Preston. Well, that was then, but this is now. And now Preston Manning has become a global warming activist. I know it's weird, but I first detected it a couple years ago in this bizarre speech he gave to his own Manning Center conference, where he said climate change was the key issue for conservatives to embrace. Take a look.
There's a responsible, moderate alternative between the polarizing position of environmental radicals prophesying planetary doom and those who completely deny the seriousness of the environmental problem and contend that all the statistics are either wrong or grossly misrepresented.
That was weird. I think a lot of people either didn't notice it or just ignored it. But then Preston Manning wrote in a Toronto newspaper calling for a carbon tax. His advice was, don't call it a tax and maybe you can trick a few of the yokels out west. That was even weirder. Well, the final straw for me was when Preston Manning helped to dissolve the Wild Rose opposition in Alberta, destroying a true conservative democratic institution and leading to the disastrous election result earlier this month. So I wrote my old friend and boss, Preston Manning, a detailed letter asking him questions, basically why, how do you justify this? And I had a theory I wanted to run by him first. And that is Preston Manning runs something called the Manning Center for Building Democracy. He's got a gorgeous office in Calgary, a huge staff, and a huge payroll. Well, he's not getting his MP's pension, so where's all that money coming from? I don't know if it's coming from the Calgary oil patch. Prices are low. They're hurting these days. Is Preston Manning taking environmental money from groups like the Rockefeller Brothers Fund in New York that's pouring millions of dollars into pro-carbon tax groups in Canada? Is he taking money from the Tides Foundation of San Francisco or their affiliate in Vancouver, Tides Canada? It's a terrible question to ask, but it was the only explanation that made sense to me. So I thought I'd put it to Preston in writing and ask him for his reply. Here's an excerpt from my detailed letter to Preston that I sent just before the Alberta election. I said, I noted, first of all, that he was going to speak at an event called Aroka that was sponsored by the Tides Foundation, and that was my reason for my curiosity. And this is what I wrote. I said, I asked him whether or not you or any of your organizations or agents have received any money from the Tides Foundation or its affiliates. I point out that the Tides Foundation is sponsoring this event. Are you being paid to attend? Does the Manning Center receive any money from Tides or other environmental foundations? Do you receive any foreign money? Will you release a list of all your donors? If not, why not? Those are pretty clear questions. I got a note back, not from Preston Manning, but from his assistant, Jean Marie. She said that Preston would not come on my show or agree to an interview, even though he has many times in the past. All right, that's fine, but let me read to you what he sent in writing. He said, through Jean Marie, Preston advises that neither he nor our organization have ever received any money from the Tides Foundation or its affiliates, nor has Aroka. That's the group he was about to speak to. The latter is a faith-based organization committed to environmental stewardship. The Aroka event in Vancouver next week is not sponsored by the Tides Foundation. Well, that's pretty categorical. As to my questions about where his money does come from, will he release his donor names? Does he take any foreign funds? Here's what he said. Donor agreements under which we receive funds generally contain privacy provisions which do not allow us to unilaterally disclose donor names. Preston regrets that you continue to attack persons rather than positions, but realizes that this is your style and unlikely to change. A bit of a zinger there. Of course, asking where his foundation money comes from is not a personal attack. It's asking who pays the piper and is that person calling the tune. You'll notice that Preston claims that he can't release the information, but he didn't even answer if he's taking foreign money. But I want to get back to the main point, which is that Aroka event which he was speaking to. In fact, it was sponsored by the Tides Foundation. Now, the Tides Foundation has dozens of tentacles. They sponsor groups like the David Suzuki Foundation. They sponsor groups like Clean Energy Canada. There are literally dozens of anti-oil sands groups, all funded by the Tides Foundation. It makes it look like it's a large grassroots movement, but it's all just fingers of the same hand. If you go to the Tides Foundation website, you can see that they created a project called Clean Energy Canada. They created it 5 years ago. This is right on the Tides Foundation website. And if you go to the Clean Energy Canada website, you'll see they were created 5 years ago by the Tides Foundation. They are a funded project of the Tides Foundation. And if you look at their staff, from their CEO on down, it's Tides Foundation staff. Claire Demers, Dan Wojnilowicz, and Marin Smith. It is a Tides project. Now, I wrote back to Jean Marie right away. I showed her the website showing the sponsorship. I said, you can see Clean Energy Canada is listed as a sponsor. Does Preston stand by his denials? If so, how does he explain the above inconsistencies? And given the above error, how do I know he's not also correct about Manning Center money? Well, Jean Marie responded with a 2-sentence reply, basically saying, apparently, Clean Energy Canada moved into Simon Fraser University and are no longer a part of the Tides Canada Foundation. Well, you can see right on both websites, the whole project was created by the Tides Foundation, staffed by the Tides Foundation, and funded by the Tides Foundation. Preston Manning didn't answer me whether or not he got paid for the event. Preston Manning is now slumming with the Tides Foundation. Slumming's the wrong word because, of course, they're a $150 million a year organization. I wonder if any of that money is helping to keep the lights on and pay the bills at the Manning Center. He won't tell me. Well, we know what the Tides Foundation is about. They despise the oil sands, they despise pipelines, they despise Alberta and Alberta industry. But what did Preston Manning himself say when he attended their events? Did he go and try to correct them? Did he try to make them love Alberta a little bit more and hate the oil sands a little bit less? Well, I'll show you video. The first video is shocking just to look at it. Who's sitting right next to Preston Manning? Why, it's the CEO of the David Suzuki Foundation, Peter Robinson. And listen to what he has to say about his fellow Tides Foundation recipient, Preston Manning.
7 years ago, when I joined the David Suzuki Foundation, if someone had told me I'd be sitting on a panel with Preston Manning, the president of Regent College, and a Christian climate scientist, I likely would have laughed. But they might have fired me. David might have fired me.
The David Suzuki Foundation is praising Preston Manning. What do you think of that? I think that says more than anything I could say. But then Preston Manning himself was asked to speak about the issue, and here's what he said. He said he wants to get Canadians used to paying more environmental taxes. Take a listen.
And if you're dealing with an audience that's skeptical about climate change or carbon pricing and that, and start somewhere else then. That principle can apply to garbage, it can apply to industrial waste, it can apply to water shortage, it can apply to traffic congestion, but get that principle inculcated and practiced. And I think that's one of the economic solutions to the problem.
Preston Manning is giving advice on how to get Western conservatives to go along with it. Get people used to paying for environmental taxes. Maybe start with something else before you bring it to the carbon tax. That's the man who used to fight against the Kyoto Protocol. What a disappointment. But here's something I think particularly eye-opening. It's a little view into the mind of Preston Manning in 2015. Preston Manning is a millionaire. He's a jet setter. He is a man who lives a large life. He's earned it. He's got 5 children. He has a large carbon footprint, so to speak. But his advice to this Tides Foundation event was that we all have to sacrifice and live a smaller life. Here, listen to him say it.
Not many people are working on the demand side, that we have this insatiable appetite for goods and services, which is what's driving this whole thing. And there's not a lot of people talking about the self-sacrifice that is required to constrain demand. And that's where the faith community.
Self-sacrifice to restrain demand, eh? Well, does that mean we should stop growing our population, stop growing our economy? Or is that just for the little people who have to self-sacrifice? But Preston Manning can jet around from foundation event to foundation event. Let me close with Peter Robinson, the CEO of the Suzuki Foundation, praising his newfound friend.
Well, first of all, I'm a social scientist. I'm not a climate scientist. So I look at issues of human behavior and motivation and those sorts of things. And I love what Preston said. I am absolutely aligned on the issues of pricing, and particularly his calls about putting a price on the bads but not the goods. I think that's an important way forward.
I love Preston Manning. Well, let me rephrase that. I love the old Preston Manning, the one who fought for the little guy against the big foundations and the secret deals. I love the old Preston Manning who wouldn't accept this kind of excuse, oh, I can't tell you where my money's coming from. Yeah, the old Preston Manning wouldn't buy that kind of rich man's politics. I love the old Preston Manning who fought against the Kyoto Protocol and stood up for Albertans, ordinary Albertans. This new Preston Manning, the carbon tax loving, condescending, finger wagging, I'm going to live a large life, you live a smaller Preston Manning? Yeah, I wouldn't work for him, not even if he paid me some of that Tides Foundation money. For TheRebel.media, I'm Ezra Levant.